Speaking of, at number 5, spiders in Dallas. And if you're an arachnophobe, make sure to look away now, because this one's going to get a little bit hairy. Picture this, an entire forest covered in a thick, enormous spider's web. Back in 2007, residents of Dallas, Texas were horrified to find something lurking in a nearby forest. It was pretty uncanny timing, really, considering that it was Labor Day weekend, and this particular attraction unwittingly attracted over 3,000 visitors. Initially, it was thought that the web had been created by a gigantic species of spider that had yet to be discovered, but it was actually found to be a blanket of many webs created by millions of tiny spiders that had infested the forest. Eventually, scientists discovered that the web was created by 11 different species of spider, the most prevalent being the Guatemalan long-jawed spider, which already sounds terrifying enough. It was discovered that this gigantic web was the result of a mass dispersal event, millions of tiny spiders floating through the atmosphere to ride air currents following an unusually wet summer. I don't know what's more terrifying, the thought of a floating cloud of spiders, or the thought of taking a stroll in the woods and getting caught up in Aragog's literal summer house. Coming in at number 4, the Patterson-Gimlin footage. Perhaps one of the most divisive pieces of paranormal footage ever captured, which has resulted in decades worth of authentication and debunk attempts, and held up as the most important piece of evidence for believers of Bigfoot. The Patterson-Gimlin tape, captured way back when in 1967 by Roger Patterson and Robert Gimlin, appears to show clear footage of a large ape-like creature covered in hair and startled by two men. Bigfoot. The footage was filmed in Northern California alongside Bluff Creek, a tributary of the Klamath River near a remote logging road. For decades, the exact location of the site was considered lost, overgrown with dense foliage, but was rediscovered in 2011 and is held as a sacred site by Bigfoot enthusiasts across the planet. As the story goes, Patterson and Gimlin were riding their horses through the dense forest when they came upon the creek and startled the creature as it crouched by the water. I mean, it's pretty clear footage, and as I see it, it's either an elaborate hoax or a person in a costume, or it's actual definitive evidence of a species that lives out in the wilderness. I don't know. What do you guys think? Next up at number 3, an injured rock climber. Now, this story is insane. Back in 2014, two hikers, Brendan Vega and Sailor Williams, headed along a trail in Santa Barbara, California, but their inexperience soon showed, and the rocky terrain was much more treacherous than they'd planned for. As it was getting dark, they tried to find a way back to their car, but in a turn of panic, Williams fractured her left leg when jumping from a rock. Things quickly got worse. Their cell phones were dead, they hadn't brought flashlights, and a pitch black evening was quickly descending. Vega tried to carry his injured companion, but he fell, shattered his glasses, breaking his elbow and breaking her ankle. It was a literal nightmare, and the pair planned for Williams to stay put while Vega went to get help. He was never seen again. Williams lay in agony throughout the night, screaming until her lungs gave out. No one answered her cries, that is, until the next morning when 3 other hikers stumbled upon the scene. They didn't know it at the time, but as they snapped some pictures of the beautiful scenery, they had actually photographed Williams' bright red hair as she lay silent in agony. And then they saw her delirious, tucked away behind a rock. Thankfully, in a crazy turn of events, they managed to save Williams' life. If it wasn't for her dyed hair, they may have never noticed her. Swinging in at number 2, evidence in a missing persons case. And this really is a deeply tragic case that is still shrouded in mystery to this day. In 2014, 2 Dutch students, Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, set out on a hike out in the deep jungle of Panama and were tragically never seen again. After not returning to the family they were staying with, the family began searching the areas around their home but found no sign of the girls. After contacting the authorities, an aerial search of the forest as well as a foot search with the help of local residents went underway. The Dutch police soon joined the investigation, but after 10 days of solid searching, there was no sign of the girls. After 10 weeks, the authorities slowed down their efforts, which is when a local woman came forward with a blue backpack that belonged to one of the girls. Inside, amongst other things, were both of the girls' cell phones, which contained several mysterious images of their last known location. It is theorized that the images captured on camera were taken to utilize the phone's flash feature in an attempt to light their path in the darkness. 2 months later, the girls' remains were discovered, but it raised more questions than than it did answers. Some of the bones were blindingly white as if they had been bleached, and they had no marks to suggest signs of trauma. Whatever happened to these girls we may never know, yet it remains to be a tragic story of the dangers of the wilderness. And finally, at our number one spot, Squamish, British Columbia.
Snowland, like it's no big deal. I don't.
And god damn it, real or fake, I just absolutely love this video. I'm not saying it's necessarily proof of the existence of the Sasquatch, but the fact that no human can move that fast uphill while walking through 3 feet of snow is pretty damn startling. Back in 2014, Miles Lamont was hiking through Squamish, British Columbia, while he and a friend camped at the side of the Tantalus mountain range. There, they captured a large bipedal figure 7,000 feet below them, making its way across the low ravine. Granted, the skeptics in all of us could find an explanation for this video, the easiest being, it's just an elaborate prank, or it's a lost hiker who just so happens to be incredibly physically fit and able to cover difficult terrain in unusually quick fashion. You see, the fact that the creator of this video is skeptical from the off, yet still accepts the conclusion that this may be evidence of an undiscovered species is pretty telling in itself. I'm not saying it's Bigfoot, but there's no denying that something doesn't quite add up in this video. Well, what do you guys think? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Kicking off at number 5, a single desk. This story comes from Reddit user Sandargan and tells the tale of a time when they were with their cousin, a forestry ranger in the Montana, Wyoming area, who spent her time as a hydrology officer testing the mountain waters. They were riding around together on one particular weekend trip on horseback and planned to spend a few days out in the boonies. It got to the second day when their cousin asked them if they wanted to see something weird. Of course, they said yes, and she led the two of them on a side journey through a tiny little ravine. As they made their way through the small wildlife path, which wound on and on through dark undergrowth, they emerged in a clearing in the middle of nowhere, and there's a huge coil of wire literally sticking out of the ground. It was like transmission wire, but small, and bear in mind that they were 2 days horseback from the nearest road. Of course, they followed the wire out of curiosity. It snaked along the ground across trees and rocks and finally descended into a small strange outlet, which even stranger was mounted to the side of a desk. It looked like a schoolteacher's desk with a metal base and a faux plastic topper, but no chair, no building, nothing, just an outlet attached to a strange desk in the middle of nowhere in the deep woods. The weirdest thing, their cousin took a dead radio out, pulled out the cord and plugged it into the outlet. It powered up and static blared. Somewhere, that wire was being powered by something. It had a purpose, a use in the middle of nowhere. And, well, they didn't stick around long enough to find out. Next up at number 4, gold in a bottle. A tale from Reddit user Infamous5 about a time spent out in the Caribou region of British Columbia. Now, this guy was a pretty successful prospector and made it their living to find precious stones and ore out in the wilderness. On this particular occasion, they came across an area with a small number of rock piles in the middle of nowhere, known as Chinese piles, which would usually indicate that someone had already done a lot of digging there back in the old days. So they started working, and within half an hour they'd found at least 10 grams of gold. Happy days. It was then though that they noticed one of the rock piles had Chinese Han characters written on them, and their stomachs sank as in that moment they realised that the rock piles were graves. He'd stumbled upon a burial site of Chinese miners that likely hadn't been seen in over 150 years. Not wanting to perturb the dead, our narrator put the gold in a glass bottle and left it behind, respectfully. Chinese miners believed that if a miner died on site, the ground that they had worked became cursed by the fallen spirit and would leave the ground marked to notify the burial of their fallen comrades. As a final caveat to the story, our narrator noted that on certain foggy mornings you could almost see the outlines of the buried dead amongst the dirt and rocks. A pretty spooky sight to stumble upon. Coming in at number 3, a mysterious cabin. Now, remember when I said the wood's sole purpose is to conceal? Well, yeah, this takes it to another level with this story. A few years back, a resident of Arcata, California was hiking through the Californian wilderness when they noticed the outline of a seemingly invisible cabin amidst the thick forest vegetation. Naturally, he called the police as it's illegal for people to permanently lodge in a national park, especially that far out in the wilderness. When the police arrived, they found a small makeshift living space that had been fashioned from scrap wood and metal, but was otherwise a perfectly sound structure. Inside was canned goods, a built-in water supply, even a library of strange books, DVDs and newspaper clippings. From a handwritten Yotun journal, they discovered that the cabin had been lived in and maintained by someone since at least 2010. The police hung a sign on the cabin notifying the occupant that it must be vacated and was illegal. Well, a day later when they returned, they'd found that the entire cabin had been disassembled and removed from the area. The only thing left behind was the international squatters symbol, a sign that there had very much been life there. The creepiest thing though, that in a relatively busy national park, no one had seen or heard a vehicle and no one had been seen leaving the area. Spooky. Bringing it in at number 2, a silver ring. This is a bit of a short and sweet one, but if there's any truth to it, then damn, this is a scary one. Reddit user Too Gone Too Fast tells the story of his uncle, a park ranger who spent many years of their life working in the vast wilderness of Montana. He tells a story about a time when he was working out in the boonies over 10 miles away from the nearest inhabited area. He recalled pulling his ATV at the top of a huge hill overlooking the entire valley, where he pulled up his binoculars to take in the view. In between the trees he could make out a clearing, and through them he saw the image of an older lady, perhaps 60 or more, dressed in all black and surrounded by a pack of between 6 and 8 wolves. Of course, he thought the lady was in distress, so he started honking his horn and fired up his ATV to get to her, taking off down the hill as fast as he could. When he made it to the clearing, he realized that no one was there. No wolves, no old woman, only a silver ring that he found in the spot that she stood, with a black stone in the middle. He still claims to have it to this day, so what do you guys think? Which wolves ring? I don't know. And finally, our number 1 spot, a shallow grave. A story that will make your hairs stand on end, from Reddit user Suitology. Great name, by the way. As these stories always go, they have a friend who's a trail ranger who was on a job out in the wilderness, dismantling illegally placed wildlife cameras and knocking down hunting stands. He was with another ranger who wasn't feeling too well and decided to head back and make the hour-long ATV ride back to base. Well, our guy's friend decided to let him be. He'd finish it up. It was only shortly afterwards that he started hearing voices. Now, keep in mind, this is literally miles off the beaten path in real unmarked territory, so there was likely no one around to make such a noise. Still, he called out, no reply. It was getting dark when he decided to head back and found that his ATV wouldn't start. The battery had been disconnected. He radioed ahead, letting dispatch know that he needed picking up. They told him it'd be an hour, maybe more, and the other ranger hadn't yet returned. He settled down and started a small fire, and that's when he heard the voices again. It sounded like an argument, and the voices were getting closer and closer, more angry. He called out and they kept on and on. That's when he heard the bang. A gunshot. He quickly doused the fire and hid, and after that he heard nothing. He lay motionless for next to half an hour when he saw the ATV lights approaching him. He told his fellow rangers what he'd heard, but despite over 3 hours of searching, they found absolutely nothing. The next day though, police and dogs came to scour the area, and after about an hour they found a shallow grave with a body that had been clearly shot in the face. The weird thing here though is that the skeleton had been there for years, buried under the shallow earth and forgotten. There were 2 possible explanations. Either the argument was completely unconnected and the 2 people had nothing to do with the long dead body, or a narrator had somehow heard the murder of a poor forgotten soul from a long time ago.
Coming in at number 5, we have the Wendigo, also referred to as the Wetico. This is a mythological man-eating creature or evil spirit from the folklore of the Native American Algonquin tribes, based in the northern forests of Nova Scotia, the east coast of Canada, and the Great Lakes region of Canada. It is a monster with characteristics of a human, or even a spirit who has possessed a human being and made them monstrous. It has been referred to as a possessing force that makes a person want to eat human flesh, found mostly in areas with a shortage of food in the wintertime. However, there are more than just one variant. The second is a northern ghoul variant. A person who eats human flesh becomes the Wendigo, rather than eating flesh because they were possessed by the Wendigo. This can oftentimes be depicted as a floating humanoid figure that moves quickly with the wind, with a starved figure and a distended belly because they're always starving for more human flesh. Now the third variant is more recent, linking descriptions of Bigfoot or Yeti with the Wendigo myth, where it is a mix between human and furry. Regardless of the variant, the Wendigo is on the hunt for human flesh, making you, a mere wanderer in the woods, their prime target.
Number 4, the Yotun. Watch your back, stay away from trees with sharp branches if you ever think you've encountered one of these Nordic nature spirits. If you're not careful, you might end up as a gruesome sacrifice. Known to many as a son of Loki, this beast man thing has a shape-shifting capability and is generally pretty ambiguously defined. Often when someone is referring to a Yotun, they could be talking about a giant, or a troll, or a number of other large mythical monsters. However, today I want to make pretty sure that we are clear in defining it as a malicious, sacrifice-seeking shapeshifter. There are many Yotun out there, but it is best to be prepared for the worst of the bunch. If you've ever seen David Bruckner's movie The Ritual, you already know how horrifying Yotun can truly be. In the movie, 4 friends go on a hiking trip in Sweden in honor of their dead friend. One of them injures their knee and they're forced to take a shortcut through an unmapped forest. Always a bad call, guys, come on. Haven't you ever watched a horror movie? During their time in the woods, they come across an eviscerated deer hanging from a tree. One of the friends wakes up with unexplainable injuries, and they even find another friend praying in the nude to a wooden statue without ever realizing it. Very soon after this, 2 of the friends are taken and killed by the Yotun. The other 2 friends discover a body as they come across a village of Yotun worshippers. This is where the real scary stuff starts. They find out that the villagers sacrifice people to the Yotun in exchange for immortality and trap the 2 remaining friends. During an attempted escape, the beast reveals its shape-shifting abilities by luring one of the men with a facsimile of his wife. Then its true form is revealed, a massive, 8-legged, partially human, partially beastly, shambling monstrosity with huge antlers and bony human arms. Ready to hear how one of the protagonists gets killed? The Yotun reaches out with these bony human arms and impales the man on a sharp tree branch, leaving him to bleed out. Ouch. Coming across one of these guys in the woods means you'll likely meet the same fate. You might think that due to the size of it, it wouldn't be too fast. Well, you'd be wrong. It is extremely fast and will know the forest like the back of its terrifying hands. It's not a nature spirit for nothing. As a son of Loki, it is an excellent trickster as well, and will take the form of whatever it needs to hunt its prey. Loki seriously got around, huh? Fathering murderous forest beasts. Jeez. The impaling upon tree branches has a bit of a Norse background as well. If you've ever studied Norse mythology, you'll know that Odin hung himself from the world tree, Yggdrasil, and was impaled upon the spear in order to learn the secrets of rune magic. It's possible that the Yotun is impaling creatures and humans alike on trees as sacrifices to Odin himself. That's hardcore, but you wouldn't want to be on the receiving end. I also mentioned it having 8 legs earlier, which may remind you of another creature in Norse mythology, Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged horse. It's all coming together. However, unless you're a Norse god yourself, I would recommend staying away from this one, and unless you like getting impaled on trees, it's your life, I guess.
Coming in at number 3, the Dullahan, also known as the original Sleepy Hollow. The Dullahan is a headless rider, usually on a black horse, who carries his head under his arm. Now, although the Dullahan is typically male, there have been some female versions throughout folklore. The mouth is usually in a hideous grin that reaches both sides of the head. Think the Joker and you're on the right track. Not only that, but his eyes are constantly moving about and can see across the countryside, even during the darkest of nights. It has been said by those who have reported sightings that the flesh of the head is the colour and consistency of mouldy cheese, which as a dairy intolerant person is revolting to me, just saying. The Dullahan uses the spine of a human corpse for a whip, and its wagon is adorned with funeral objects, e.g. candles and skulls to light the way. The spokes of the wheels are made from the thigh bones, the wagon's covering made from the worm-chewed pal or dried human skin. Now here's where things get spooky, especially for anyone tracking through the dark woods. When the Dullahan stops riding, that is when a person is due to die. The Dullahan will then call out the person's name, at which point that person will immediately perish. Now even more terrifying still, there is no way to bar the path against a Dullahan. All locks and gates open to them when they approach. They also do not appreciate being watched while on their errands, throwing a basin of blood on those who dare to do so. You have been warned.
At number 2, we have Skinwalkers. In Navajo lore, Skinwalkers are known as he who walks on all fours, powerful medicine men and witches who have acquired various supernatural powers through terrible means. Shapeshifting is one of their most well-known attributes, most commonly taking the forms of coyotes, crows, bears, wolves, cougars, and owls. They also have a tendency to appear as unspeakable chimeras with hideous amalgamations of both human and animal features. Skinwalkers begin as humans who place terrible curses upon themselves through rituals of pure evil. They're required to commit terrible atrocities, grotesqueries, and grave taboos. This can often require the killing of a family member or a loved one. When all is said and done, they're infused with the insidious curse and the awful powers that come with it. Once a skinwalker, they are often banished from their tribes for submitting to evil and left to walk the badlands and forests forever. As they traverse the wastes, they are often seen as animalistic, even in their human forms. Also, they will often travel naked. If they weren't scary enough already, there's a chance you'll come across a nude, ungodly abomination in the woods. Yikes. These monsters are extremely strong and agile in addition to their magical powers. They can use their abilities to mesmerize, instill fear, sow confusion, and even take control of another's body for a short period of time. On top of this, they're extremely difficult to kill. Unless you know their original name or have a very specific ash to coat your knife, good luck getting rid of a skinwalker. There are countless stories of skinwalkers being terrifying in forests all across North America. One story details the time a duo in Arizona came across a gigantic coyote sitting perfectly still in the middle of the road. It didn't even flinch when they drove by it and started chasing the car afterwards. It was right on the car's tail, even at 50 miles per hour. This obviously freaked the passengers out, but what happened next was absolutely bone-chilling. The coyote ran alongside the car and looked into the window with human-like eyes. Then it smiled at the driver and let out a screech before running off into the night. Yeah, remind me not to take a late night drive in Arizona. Another skinwalker story is even scarier thanks to the long-lasting consequences of the encounter. A man and his friend were on a hiking trip and got separated at some point. Hours later they reconnected, but there was something wrong with one of them. He didn't seem to be himself and seemed to not know many details about his own life. Upon returning to the city, the friend who disappeared seemed lost, like he didn't know where he was going. He was dropped off at his house and was never heard from again. This could very well be an instance of a skinwalker taking over someone's body for a very long time. Whether the friend's body was taken over or if he was killed and replaced by the skinwalker, it's hard to tell. The prospect of a loved one being taken over permanently by a skinwalker is blood-curdling indeed. So unless you want yourself or a family member being taken over, I would say avoid skinwalkers to the best of your ability. Not that you would be able to tell if you were near one.
And finally coming in at number 1, SCP-1000. SCP-1000 is a nocturnal omnivorous ape which ranges from 5 to 10 feet in height and weighs between 200 and 600 pounds. They often have grey, brown, black, red and occasionally white fur and possess large eyes with good vision, with intelligence that is on par with the common chimpanzee.
Now, SCP-1000 evolved alongside humans up until, 10,000, 15,000 years ago, when an extinction event eliminated all but 1 to 5% of their population. This event was triggered by SCP-1000 contracting an anomalous pseudo-disease which can be classified as SCP-1000-F1. This disease is passed on at the genetic level and affects every present-day instance of SCP-1000. Now, the effect of SCP-1000-F1 is as follows. Any humanoid that directly or indirectly observes any instance of SCP-1000 has a minimum 2% chance of being instantly killed through anomalous means via permanent cessation of brain function.
Meaning if you cross paths with an instant of SCP-1000 while alone in the woods, you have a high chance of biting the dust. All media reports related to SCP-1000 are to be examined for potential verifiability, and all organizations and individuals investigating SCP-1000's existence are to be kept under surveillance by Mobile Task Force Zeta-1000 and discredited or administered amnestics.